Hi, I'm Seamless, and this is part 2 of today's How to Bass. Unlike part 1, this will be about going over every little individual decision I made to create this bass as to why it actually made this bass. And then, hopefully, we will learn things as a result. So let's talk about this Harmor patch. So I'm actually going to demonstrate this by opening up a new one, because it's actually kind of interesting how I got what this does. Alright, so new Harmor. Now, I called that bass ultra low because of what happens when you detune it. So, I mentioned there's a whole bunch in previous Harmor tutorials, but I'll talk about it again now because it's actually kind of an interesting effect. This detune function here, what this does is, instead of changing the pitch of like the whole thing, it only changes the pitch of the harmonics. Which you might be thinking, well, they're all harmonics. Well, they're not. The very lowest note is the fundamental tone. The fundamental tone. So we have the fundamental and then harmonic partials. I think that's the correct terminology. But the point being is that the detune function moves them away from the fundamental. Like so. So this creates a very interesting effect, but if we were to go by even amounts, we get this sort of effect. The first step, if you go to ratio 2, is actually pretty much the same as if we were changing it into the square form termination. The difference being that this method, by using the mix knob, gets it to the square formation by turning off certain harmonics. And the attune function gets to the square formation by moving the frequencies until it's actually there. Which is important distinction, because this means that if you do anything to those harmonics, like with the unison thing or the prism or anything like that, if you spread them out, that information applied to the harmonics is still being active. It's just spread across the spectrum more. But you can go all the way up to 16. Now, the harmonics are all way super high, but you might notice that the fundamental is still down there. So what I have done with the other one is that I actually turned it down so low that even the fundamental tone is actually like, it's off the map. It's so far low that it's not even audible. But the second harmonic is now in the position that used to be the fundamental harmonic. And now this is actually almost the same as what it was originally. However, the spread of the harmonics as they are now is actually a bit different than it would have been if it was the correct, like, traditional orientation. This is more obvious when you distort it. That wobbling you're hearing is a result of phase cancellation because the harmonics are just short of the correct configuration. So this creates a very interesting result of sounds. But we only get this when we're super duper low. Like we are transposed down 9 octaves, 8 here, and then also I moved center middle C to be a 1 higher octave up, so that the notes that I'm playing are lower. But if we go up higher, we actually have another sound. This is actually the correct pitch, as a result of the 16 being where they are, the pitch ratio of 16. So then if we do unison, we get lots of very interesting sort of effects. And actually, if I were to play the preset that I used, the ultra low brass, this one, that's what I actually used to be the carrier. So in part B, I have basically that active. You might notice if we look at the harmonics here, we see that in part B, it's actually it's an octave lower than part A, and you can even see how this particular harmonic doesn't quite line up right. And that has to do with the unison, but also has to do with the fact that because we're doing that whole crazy 16 detune 8 transposition, that it's actually not in the correct position to begin with. So the clash that it has as a result of being played against something that is in the correct position creates this sort of Reezy effect. Now this one I actually detuned to 2 so that it would be in the square formation. It's the square formation because, okay, an additive saw wave is all harmonics engaged with a particular, volume configuration. And a square formation is all harmonics except it's all even harmonics. So all the it's all odd harmonics. So all the even harmonics are gone. We can even see this if we go into the timbre window, that the waveform that creates the square wave is one that comes in and takes out all the even waveforms, all the even harmonics. And then the saw is just that they're all engaged. So that's the difference between a square and a saw wave in additive generation land. So yeah, I'm playing this against the this top bass here to have reinforcement. That's being started. Like after this happens, it becomes a relatively normal sound. It's just that the timbre and the interaction between harmonics is just a little bit different, and it gives it a bit of a uniqueness to it, which is nice. The local EQ, an A, I turned up this. This is the lower harmonic, but that does absolutely nothing because there's actually no lower harmonic even there. It's so far down that it's inaudible. And over here, I'm turning down the first harmonic, which is actually where this guy sits. And I did that because if I didn't do it and I turned off B, it's actually like a little bit off. It's out of tune. It's like not in tune. You can see how far off tune it is. Like look at this difference here. This is the engaged first harmonic. That is to say, not the fundamental, but the first harmonic, which is an octave above the fundamental. And this is where it's actually supposed to be. So I turn it off. But this particular line here controls that particular fundamental in part A. That's what this particular window does. And so that's why I turn it off there and then reinforce it by creating it in part B. So now the bass note that we're actually hearing is the right pitch for the key. Otherwise it was sharp. It was too much. Now you might be thinking, okay, well, if none of this controls harmonics, why are these here? Like, what is this configuration? And I kind of want to talk about what this window does for a second. So this is the local EQ window. And what this does is it lets you EQ out particular harmonics of the sound. I'll actually do this in I'll do this in a new Harmor because this is the. Let's go to local EQ. So what this is doing is it's turning off particular harmonics that fall in the range that I set here. Now, what is this range though? Now this isn't our EQ that's set in spectrum information. It's not hertz. It's set in octaves because it's the local EQ, which means that it's an EQ per note for each harmonic that you play. You can see it following the note there, versus the global EQ, which actually is set in hertz, and it stays where it is no matter what note you're playing. So if I go back to local EQ, now these are set in octaves. Now the way that harmonics work is that if I just play a note, let's play a note. See what we see here. This is the fundamental tone. This is the very bottom of the EQ here, right? And then up here is one octave higher. This is the first harmonic. And over here is half of that. It's a fifth higher. And then the fourth harmonic is another octave. But then it's half, and then it's half. And then that's where I get all these huge, incredible numbers of harmonics. But this jump from one to the next octave has absolutely nothing in between it. Which means that from here to here, there's not a single thing. This does nothing to the sound. Does nothing at all. But this has a huge effect just here. And you can actually see it mess with the waveform when I do that. So this is you can see it's making it more of a sine wave because it's actually, I'm increasing the amplitude of the fundamental frequency, which means that the first sine wave is going to have more of an influence on the sound. And then as well, when I take out the second harmonic, it changes the influence of the rest of the harmonics have on the end result of the shape. So that's how the local EQ works. Indeed. So let's go back to this, using this as a carrier. So I made the sound, and then the sound I'm using, and then that's a carrier. And then I put it in the mixer, and then I accentuate the highs. In the break, George had asked, why do we do that? Why do we accentuate the highs? Well, this has to do with a thing about how the Vocodex works, vocoding in general. And this you'll actually run into this problem a lot if you vocode high frequency modulators like a female vocal, because the monster bass side of things, we tend to want to turn down the sound so that it sounds all low and evil and rah. And in doing that, if we just straight turn the pitch down, what's going to end up happening is that we're going to lose high frequency definition because there are not going to be any there. And if we actually turn down a high frequency voice far enough down to create this sort of timbre in the sound, we're basically just not going to have high frequencies. It's like we're going to have it's like above 10K is going to be gone because there's this original ceiling. We turn it down. There's nothing there to replace it. So there's a couple of ways to handle this because if we pitch shift it directly inside Vocodex with the whole way through, like we're doing here, that'll be a problem. But if we pitch it with the modular pitch shift window, this is less of a problem because this means that we are turning the pitch down by spectrum. So if I want to, I could just do this, where I don't move the high frequencies down, but I am moving this down. As you can see, like the frequencies is actually a bit too much, and that's because I accentuate it properly, and I have options not to do that, and so I don't. Now, same deal with the modulator though. See, the modulator that I used was these guys. See, it's so easy, which is
so easy,
and that's right.
That's right.
So easy.
That's right.
And then I stretched them not by pitch but by time, so that they're longer than they sound. If I were to actually turn this off. That's what it sounds like. We actually have plenty of high frequency information going on there because I didn't mess with the pitch. It's not the pitch difference. It's just the time stretching. So that's why that works. So then let's go to the EQ here. So if I compare this to the default settings, you can hear suddenly that the whole character of the sound is different. And this has to do with the fundamental way a vocoder actually does its job. And basically what vocoding is a live analysis of the modulator that's being applied to the carrier through the band system. The band system being, this business. So as this is being played, that's the carrier. Where's the modulator? You can kind of see its influence over the vocoder. So it's doing a live EQ analysis of the spectrum of various areas of the spectrum, and then the bands or what are indicating the level of that particular frequency, and then that's covering the carrier. The carrier is having it up is being modulated by the modulator. That's the fundamental way a vocoder does its job. So if we're lacking high frequencies, it's because there's not a lot. The modulator itself doesn't have a lot of high frequency presence. So that's why I EQ'd up the high frequencies in the modulator, and then also the carrier, so that when the modulator is having a high frequency presence, there's actually something there for it to have an effect on. So that's what's up with that. Did I do anything else special in this? Oh yeah, so the pitch shifting here. This was mostly just set the taste. I just kind of wanted to bring it down. I noted when I was doing this that there was enough high frequency action going on that I could afford to turn it down here and not do any kind of correction on it. And then I messed with the main volume or the main pitch difference. Until I got what I wanted. I mean, you don't need to go here. I just liked being there. Now, some real fun happens when we mess with the bandwidth and the filter fatness here, which is what this is. And it's a little weird, like to determine what this does, but we can kind of see the difference in the images here. So on this side, we have one that's kind of rounded, and this side, I have one that sort of has corners-ish. It's still kind of rounded, but it's fatter. Now, what this is basically determining is the sharpness between the individual bands. All right, so check us out. Oh, damn it, stay there. What's wrong with you? No, whatever. I mean, what I was trying to show there was this. That's not what that does. I was trying to show that when there are bands there, if I bring the bandwidth down so far that they're literally not touching each other, that the spread is not in the edges of each band, then the filter fatness doesn't particularly matter. But if I'm crossing over, suddenly it's a big deal. And then typically it's actually on max. Now, what this means, let's see, 100% fatness. Yeah. So what this is basically mean is that it's like the resonance of the band pass nature of each individual band is wider. This is basically bandwidth for each of the filter bands of the 62 filter bands that there are. So the basic effect on the sound this has is that when it's totally fat, it smooths it out a little bit less, and when it's totally thin, it's a bit sharper. So after I made the bandwidth really high, I still wanted some of the sharpness to come back, so I brought the filter fatness down until the sharpness came back in a way that I liked. As you can see, you can kind of get the same result by having the fatness all the way on, but then just turning the bandwidth down to the point where you get kind of the same effect. But what we're basically doing here is we're choosing between two different kinds of vocoder artifacts that we like. And because sometimes, a common complaint about using Vocodex is like, how do I make it not sound like I'm using Vocodex? It sounds so Vocodex-y. Why is that? Why does it sound so vocodery? How do we make it not sound like that? And this is one of the ways that you do. You're basically choosing the way that it sounds like. And if you stack enough of them together, different ways to make it sound like one thing or another, then eventually you're going to get away from the fact that it sounds like a vocoder. I mean, you're going to have a vocoder bass, obviously, but it's not going to have that kind of glassy sound, unless you want it, because it's always an option. So the other way is this modulator bandwidth over here. So what this does is it basically focuses it towards two extremes. And this is basically a mode of saturation. So if I have it all the way on this side, it's trying really hard to get really sharp on the main EQ action of the sound. And so it's basically being really sharp. It's like saying, okay, here there's a sound here, so now there's a band here. That's what's happening. One area, one band, as much as it can. So, but then if I go all the way to the other side, what this is saying is that we have one event, and then it has a slope. It's sloping out of the way, so that the sound is saturated. Basically, it's basically saturating it out. So I get like a happy beat in between that. Again, to a degree that I like, just because I do. Another way to kind of achieve this sort of saturation effect is to use unison, which I'm not doing right now, but I'll talk about how that works. So if I had it all the way at super sharpness, and then I engage unison, this kind of does the same thing. So because what does unison normally do? Normally, unison is a pitch effect, which means that you play two voices of the same sound and then slightly change the pitch of one of the voices so that it's detuned kind of deal. Well, pitch has a very different effect on the universe in a vocoder world, because what happens in the pitch world on a vocoder is that pitch determines the location of a band. So this means that if we're adding unison to the effect, which is the band, we're basically spreading the influence of whatever that one particular piece of pitch information is in the band. So the effect, when it's super duper apparent like this, and I have two voices, is that one of them is really, like the voices, one of them is really high pitched and the other one's really low pitched. It's not actually changing the pitch of the incoming sound. Neither is any pitch setting in the vocoder. It's not actually changing the pitch. It's just moving the bands, which is effectively the same. It's the exact same result in terms of how a vocoder works. So that's an option, but it's not the one that I used here. So the other thing that's kind of like makes it sound Vocodex-y when you're messing with stuff is the result of the envelope on each band. So we have hold, attack, and release, and then we got options of that. By default, we have this minimum time idea on, and it's because if you don't have it on and you have all of them on 0, it sounds like that, which can be cool sometimes, but most of the time that's not what you're after. So you have to have a little bit of each. Well, okay, I meant to lie, because you saw that I had none of these, but you have to have at least a little bit of release happening. So this is basically determining once a bit of information happens on the modulator that falls into the band area, what the band is going to do. So we have a hold, attack, and release. So like once the information happens, there's a bit of an attack time for it to come on and for it to come out, and then a release time for how long it hangs out and then a hold time for how long it stays at whatever level it ends up at, kind of deal. And if we go to the default settings, it sounds squelchier with less time, with less delay action. And let's go back to regular. That's because the bands are moving pretty fast. They're moving pretty fast to the action of the actual modulator. But if we like increase the release a lot, we get kind of a robot-y sort of sound because it's actually smoother. And what ends up happening is that means that the bands are staying on long enough to the point where we're actually listening to the original timbre of the carrier itself because it's becoming more apparent. So I wanted to be a little bit of a smoother sound, not necessarily the squelchy sound. So I went with the high release to get that result. And what this is two different release curves. So one of them just straight comes releases down, and the other one is the double curve, so it releases and then it kind of swings out, kind of thing. This is just a taste, you know. So that's why I picked. Indeed. So in here I also turned up the carrier to let a little bit of bass in there, and then in the gain multiplier, I set it so that the low frequencies weren't there in the actual wet vocoder sound, so that the bass could be filtered in through the actual original carrier sound. Keeps it more stable that way. I also went to the bandwidth, which has pretty much the same effect per band as it does as the pitch version does, which means that I can change the thickness of the band per area of the spectrum. The reason why I do this is because I wanted to add additional definition to particular areas of the sound. So the thinner the bands get, the more the kind of sharp glassy sound you get. So in particular parts of the spectrum, I wanted that sharpness to be there so that there's a bit of actual like grit to the sound. And then as well on other parts of the spectrum, like particularly the low end, that kind of thinness can result in this weird glassy sound. Like kind of like, it's like xylophone-y, fluty, like round sound. And I don't want that to be going on there, so that if I increase the bandwidth, this actually decreases the amount of definition a particular area of the sound has. And it'll just sound more like the carrier's result. So that's why I do that. Did I miss anything else? Yeah, okay, let's talk about compression. So in the EQ, again, accentuate to high frequencies. And you can even see like where the frequencies land of why I had to do that, because there's just not that many there. So then go to the compressor. And this is a very basic multi-band compression where I just basically bringing up all the bands so that all their frequency information is pretty stable. As you can see with the low, I'm trying to keep as much of a consistent bass as possible. And the low frequencies I had the default release time of the mid area, which is 87 milliseconds. And the mid I turned down a little bit so that it actually snaps a bit harder to the in-out graph settings here. And on the high frequency, same deal, only slightly less fast. It's still faster than the low, but it's not as fast as the mids. Because if it was faster, the distortion might be a little bit weird, just from my own experience. And then I also set mono for the bass, so that just stereo spread the basses or center, so there's no chance of phase cancellation ruining the bass. And then a bit of spreading on the mid, and the same amount of spreading on the high, just to give it an additional stereo kind of meaning. The master, there's not any compression going on, so I actually have the compression off. I'm using the soft saturation to keep it at 0 dB. You don't even actually need to do that. Like, in terms of mixing, this doesn't really make anything easier, but I just like doing that, and I also like the sort of the sturdy effect of the soft saturation on the high peaks. Taking a breath. Yeah, so that's what I had done there. Without the compression, this is what it sounds like. With the compression, this is what it sounds like. Without the EQ. Without any of the EQ. So that those decisions that you make at every level have a sort of important cumulative effect on the end result of your sound. This being a particularly complicated version of that. Indeed. So, if you have any questions about any of this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.